Okay, I'm Graham Jeffrey from the University of the West of Scotland, and I'm here with Tony Fegan from Tala Community Arts on the outskirts of Dublin, just across the water in the Republic of Ireland. Tony, great to have you with us. Just give us a bit of history about you, your background, and how you ended up at Tala Community Arts.
Well, I suppose I was just the start of it is I grew up, funnily enough, in a place called Walkinstown, which is just a stone's throw from Tala. And as a child, I played in the fields in Tala before it was ever built. And then I went, as lots of Irish people is, as kind of economic migrants, and I grew up in England. And I got educated there, and I got into the arts there. I was a drama teacher in a very famous or notorious school called Holland Park School. During the 80s, I moved into being director of Battersea Arts Centre. I then helped set up up in Kilburn a kind of community school, expressive and performing arts faculty that had artist residencies within that context, and worked a lot with developing adult education and stuff there. And then eventually I ended up, I went to the London International Festival Theatre Lift, where I became their, I suppose, eventually what was called their learning director, which was really, I suppose, working within a context of participation in an international festival context, a biennial festival, and working across the most amazing cultural and social landscape of London in the period probably from 93 to, I have to always think about this, to 2007, 15 years. So that's my background, I suppose. And then I decided I needed to, in a strange way, come home. So I came back to Ireland. I'd had a place here since the 90s, and I bedded down here. And then I took up a post at at Tala Community Arts, which was an organisation in Tala which had grown from being a village of 300 people to 1,000 people in the early 70s, and it's something around about 30 or 40,000 now. There's the region, which is a municipality outside of the edge of Dublin, is there's about 88,000 people live in it. And if I was to say that if 13% of people in Ireland currently come from different cultural backgrounds from outside of Ireland, and and new Irish, so to speak, and 35 of that 13% live in South Dublin County, where I work. So it's a very interesting environment, or whatever. And I took over an organization that had gone through a bit of a bumpy ride, and over the first set of years from 2007 probably to 2010, 11, including dealing with the economic crash which hit Ireland really profoundly at the time, kind of managed to get us on an even keel. And I work for what is a participatory arts organization. So we make work with all sorts of people in all sorts of communities, both communities of geography locally and communities of interest, people who want to do things with us. And sometimes they begin their creative journeys with us, and sometimes they come to a middle part where they want to have done some work and they want to do something different. And sometimes they're highly kind of skilled and experienced in doing work, and we support artists who involved in socially engaged practice or community arts, or a range of participatory arts, different kind of ways in which people view the lens of their work. And we support a lot of young emerging artists that are coming out of our own locality and our own, I suppose what we say, we're partners with lots of other people in a kind of an emerging arts ecology in a community that has emerged from an inner city displacement over the last 40 years.
So tell us about the activities of the organization pre-pandemic. So to kind of give us a kind of outline of the kind of program.
Okay. So what?
Pandemic.
Okay. So we have a number of we we've organized ourselves in this way. We have a number of core programs that happen, you know, come what may. We're funded by the Arts Council of Ireland, and we're funded by the local authority. And like everybody else in the arts world, we have to chase funding through other project funding, through a variety of, mostly of social funding and some national funding. There isn't a big territory of philanthropic funds in Ireland, simply because we're at the other end of a colonial system. We didn't have, you know, most of the philanthropic organizations in the UK come out of the benefits of empire, where we were on the other end. So we don't really have those. So we don't have the range of philanthropic institutions they have in the UK. So that's always been challenging. And there's been a mantra amongst our public funding authorities about, you know, getting ourselves more corporately sponsorship funded. But again, it's a very, you know, we're a very small country. We're 4.5 million people, etc. And there isn't a tradition, one, of philanthropic giving in that way, unless you're talking about the heritage cultural institutions. And there isn't really in terms of corporate sponsorship in the same way.
And is there something also about the sort of peripherality of you in relation to Dublin as a sort of
yes. So we're, well, very good point. We're on the edge of Dublin. We have a kind of canal. It's the first edge, which was the old boundary of the old city, and then fell into what was the old 19th century, early 20th suburbs. And then beyond that, we have a peripheral road called the M50 that runs around the city, and we're beyond that. So prior to the economic crash in 2008, there was a lot of conversation about Tallaght becoming a city by 2015, and that, you know, got postponed really because of the crisis. So one of the things, a
euphemistic way of putting it.
So one of the challenges that we have is that in terms of cultural consumption, there's a lot of emphasis from people in that wider Dublin area who, if they're actively engaged in artistic and cultural consumption and going to things, you know, have their sights traditionally on metropolitan Dublin. And so that those of us who are on that periphery, and there are a number of new build suburbs around that periphery, you know, have a challenge of capturing those people who have economically, traditionally, got the money to support the arts in terms of box office and tickets. And secondly, in a sense, have some influence. And I think the thing is that what happens is, so that we've had to carve out a kind of a niche, all of us, for to say why our locality is important. And it is important because it has some social and economic indices which are very different to the inner city, and some challenging environments, not all the time, that actually need support. However, if we had 50 miles between us and metropolitan Dublin or anywhere else, and we'd have green belt around us, then we'd have a very much more defined kind of territory of where we began and where we ended. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, one has to remember, in Ireland, we have these small urban cities, environments, which are very small in relation to the UK or other even European countries, but certainly the UK. And actually what we have is a huge rural hinterland, which actually traditionally and historically has been served not well by arts provision in terms of a public investment in the arts within to thing. And there are all sorts of reasons, that infrastructural things, lack of buildings, lack of whatever, but it's also very often about how historically Irish rural life has been organized, I suppose, in a way. So if I come back to South Dublin County, which is the municipality, so to speak, that we're in, and Tallaght is the county town, you know, there's a lot of new things going on in a new kind of community. When I say new, it's 40 or so more years old, but you know, it still feels new. And there are the first settlers who are getting older still there, and we'll talk about talking about loading up their minis with their mattresses and various things and moving out into the wilds to settle. So we have that, and yet we also have, wonderfully, I think, in the time that I've been there, the first generation of young people who were growing up there, who feel rooted in it, who are going, some of them, to third level education. You know, many of them, it's the first time in the history of their families, because of the social economic backgrounds they come from, that are going to third level education, and then still a minority going to third level education in terms of the arts or cultural industry. So it's a new thing. So it's very exciting, kind of an emerging arts ecology of people now in their 20s who are choosing to stay here and building and making work. And that's why it's an interesting place to be. There's no way that you can be complacent working in Tallaght.
And increasingly it's multicultural. So
And
having
increasingly
been probably when it started,
it was very
multicultural.
monocultural. Well, the first 1,000 families who moved into the village were all, you know, nominally white Irish, but they weren't rural village Tallaght Irish, and that was the shock horror that had happened. So to answer your question, I'm sorry I gave you a lot of context, but answer your question. We have a series of core programs, and then we have a series of things which we call projects, which usually run over an extended period of time. So our core projects are, we have something called Double Take Studio, which is a studio which before the pandemic hosted 70 artists of adults with people living with disabilities who came, and it was a visual arts studio, and they came to be practicing art in the studio. And we have a team of artist mentor facilitators. They don't get formally taught. If somebody wants to learn a very particular skill or whatever, and there are often 2 or 3 people want to know something, then our artist mentors are there. But actually what they're there for is to support those people to explore what they want to explore artistically, and obviously help them to do that. So we've got that. And what we've been able to do in that, over that period of time since 2010, has been also to get a number of people on a community work placement scheme. So we have 8 in total overall. I'll tell you about the other project in a moment, who actually are employed, and they get paid for 3 years, and they are studio assistants on the days when they're not a practicing artist. So there's some of them interested in that. So that's been a huge kind of step forward socially and culturally for a group of people who, you know, historically don't get employment really, or very challenged in getting employment. So the next other program we have is something called Doors to Elsewhere, which is a theatre ensemble of about 20 odd people with intellectual disability who make devised work. And we have 2 very, very skillful theatre makers and writer and devisers who work with them. And they make work, you know, from their experience, but, you know, but outside of their experience. So they did amazing Can't See the Wood for the Trees, an amazing version of the Red Riding Hood story about the childminder not looking after Red Riding Hood, who was a rather adventurous young woman and ended up in the woods with her grandmother, who was an ex-cabaret singer who was having an affair with the wolf. But the most important thing about that piece was they worked with a professional actor, Jed Murray, who's very well known here in Ireland and whatever it is. And he was the detective. And what they did was they ran rings around the detective, which was really about them challenging the official authority environment that they come up against every time. And they kind of went, we'll show you what we can do. So there's that. We have a street arts academy, which is a hip hop academy, largely rooted in dance, but not exclusively so, spoken word. And we've had work with music and kind of, I suppose, visual arts, what I call public art, graffiti and whatever in the past. And that is primarily made up of young people of different cultural heritage, the first generation of Irish who were growing up here from a different cultural heritage, which there are a significant number of. And what's been very interesting about that over the last few years, that because of the critical mass of them, that they're young people of color, they are the majority often when we've had young white Irish join the group, which is a very interesting experience, because previously, a lot of them were going as individual young people of color to what was a predominantly white cultural social environment. So it's been very interesting, and they're amazing. They're really dynamic, and they produce very interesting work, which has always got a frisson about where they understand that they are and what they're interested in. So when they end up in the local youth dance festival, they usually take the roof off because they're very skillful in what they do. But for example, We Are Here, in which they made in 2016, 2017, I think, which was a dance piece, which was about the migration crisis across Europe in 2015. And it was pretty impressive. And last year, before, in fact, the end of 19, before the pandemic, they were asked to go to the National Youth Council of Ireland and present something at a big summit there, and they took the roof off the place.
And do you bring in, I mean, in terms of, I mean, do you bring in other professional programming? Are you, I mean, how does it sit with other organizations?
Well, I think what we've done over the last period, and if I just kind of, there are a couple of other things. We have a creative campus which kind of works with recently graduate students from the National College of Art and Design, and we work with second level students, and we get some scholarships from that college to allow our second level students, mainly people, young people from families who've never gone to third level education, to go and do a portfolio course during a summer to see whether they want to go to art school, etc. So there are kind of core programs, and then we do these one-off. We're not one-off we do projects which are often durational over 2 years or something to make a participatory, performative or installation piece with a range of other people from different communities geographically, or
and those tend not to be building based, they tend to be out and about. Is that fair to say?
No, a combination thereof. I mean, I think that so to come back to your point about programming and building, a lot of I have a very wonderful, I'm full-timer, I've got a part-time administrator, this is the economics of how we operate, and I have an amazing core team of freelance artist facilitators who are very experienced in working within a participatory arts, socially engaged arts practice, mostly within a performative area rather than the visual arts, although obviously we have a group of people who run the studio who are visual arts people. And in a way, we talk a lot to all of those client groups or groups that we work with, and we, our conversation with them is always, what should we be doing next? What's coming up and whatever. So before the lockdown, we were working for a thing called Perceptions 2020 with both our groups of participants living with disabilities around Article 23 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights around the right to work, which of course, if you're a person with a disability, that's not a given. And so they were making some very interesting, when we were about to do an installation performance piece in the very huge gallery at Rua Red, which is the arts centre base that we're in as a tenant. We don't run the building. And yes, and then there are times when we bring other people in, or people come for a residency with us in order to make a piece of work. But generally, they're coming to us because they want to work in this very particular context.
So that was all rolling along quite happily. And when I last came to see you, which was about a year ago, we were wandering around Dublin quite happily in the slightly freezing February weather. I remember it being very windy, and we had vague whiff in the air of COVID. There was a sort of a generally slightly anxious atmosphere, not least because certain people close to us had got good antennae for that kind of thing. So what happened what happened at the point where you suddenly realized, okay, we're going to have to not quite abandon ship, but we're going to have to radically change course?
Well, I mean, I think like many people, we all went into a kind of shock moment and went, oh my goodness. And the shock moment was, how long will this last? What do we do? Whatever. And then we realized, well, it wasn't going to, things were not going to be short term. It was going to be longer term. So then we went on the huge learning curve that many, our work has been rooted. It's not that we don't work with filmmakers and we haven't worked with people online or whatever previously, or in digital. We have a wonderful digital artist person that we worked with, who's worked with our double take studio and whatever. So it wasn't that we didn't know people, but that was not our everyday reality. Everyday reality was really what I call now three-dimensional time in real time and whatever. And so that was a shock. So we had to kind of get ourselves together. And then the second shock was, of course, the economic shock. Now, thankfully, as the organization we are, our moments of public output in terms of audiences are never predicated on the amount of box office that we have to come back. So while in the good times, that's always been, oh my God, if only we could make more box office, that's always been a kind of moment of wish, but in a way it turned out to, so we didn't go from relying on, say, a 70% income from box office to zilch. We went, oh my gosh, we need to tighten our belt a bit more and work out what we do. So that was the first thing. And the second thing, we went on the huge learning curve that everybody went on, what I call the Zoom culture, and everything else to do with that, all points to do with online stuff. And we got on with it and did it. And and we learned through the hard way, and there was an incredible generosity amongst our freelance facilitators. And at one point in time, we had to guarantee to pay them their money as long as we could. So we didn't completely lose them before there was any COVID payment. So we made that economic adjustment and said that we were in March, and we said, okay, we will guarantee everybody's payments up until the end of May, and then we'll see where we are. Because I couldn't see financially beyond that time what we might do, hoping and thinking somebody might step in and work out what's going to happen.
So I'm going to come back to the question of sort of business models and money and box office a bit later, because it's been interesting, because I think in some organizations, it's a very interesting question, this thing about ticket sales and
yes,
how that works,
yes,
or not. But just tell us about then what you did in relation to the program and the activities.
Yeah, so basically what we did is we looked at everything and went, okay, what can we do? What can we do online? How are we going to do it and whatever? And we migrated everything online, and then we moved things that we couldn't make decisions for further down the year, and said, well, we'll know we can move that one, and we'll move that, and everybody was okay about that, and we moved certain things down further down the year in terms of program. A big event in Gallery 1 at Real Red, the perception, in which was everybody was working. We were at a kind of crucial moment, 2/3 away, when people were producing work, went out the window. And in a way, in a way, we were lucky, because sorry, I know you're going to talk about the economic model, but in a way, what I did was, okay, we're stopping this now. The money that we've aggregated to this project, I'm going to disperse in another way to keep us going. So we went online, and so our performance groups came online, our visual artists, not all of them, because many of them live within a kind of digital poverty, digital divide, partly to do with economic circumstances, partly to do with without their support workers, in people with disabilities, and particularly who were living with older parents and people. There were a whole series of other problems which we're still working through now, and actually we've been able to get some funding to get equipment and to find another way of working with, but it's taken that length of time to do that. But we had a significant number of people who wanted to be engaged, and we did a lot of work to engage them. So we ran our theatre work online. We were in the middle with our Street Arts Academy, making a piece where we were exploring how the new Ireland, in terms of that diverse cultural practice, met the historical nationalist story of Ireland in the Pearse Museum, which was being the home of Patrick Pearse, a very radical school at the beginning of the 20th century, and he was the main signatory of the Declaration of Independence, etc., etc., etc. And that was a thing about young people of colour making a dance pieces in that museum, in the house where which is the mythology deep mythology about the forming of the Irish state and whatever. And we'd already in 2016 been part of a big centenary thing down there, of which some of those young people, not all of them, had been involved in, you know, a very diverse group of young people.
So in terms of, you say you just moved it online. I mean,
well, you know,
not straightforward, is it? Oh,
no, it's not. It's not. We had to learn. You know, I'm still learning about. Every day I find out something more I can do on Zoom, and we've now got a training program where we're going to get everybody we know in our circle and the next circle in our community, whatever, and we're going to do a whole series of 6 sessions so that we all know that we can spin everything on a sixpence on Zoom and everything else and whatever, because we've all learned, you know, as we've gone along, what do you need to know in order to do this thing. So that's what we did. So we come back to that film. We did everything. We then, with the young filmmaker, we ran the workshops online. They kind of, you know, it was called Beyond the Glass Case. It now was called Breaking the Glass Case, which was kind of to make their commentary. And we made a film probably in 6 weeks, which was not the film that we were going to make, but my goodness, everybody learned a lot, you know. And that was the first part of it, when young people, teenagers, were at home and trying to homeschool and everybody within their home environments was trying to adapt to a new environment. So, you know, the thing that we're all very familiar now about how many dance pieces or performance pieces you can see in people's bedrooms or in corridors or various adjuncts to living spaces, so you don't barge into the domestic fare of your mum, dad, and everybody else doing what they have to do.
And did you? And there must have been quite big access problems. I mean, you talked to that in relation to those the adults with disabilities.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what did you do about the access?
Well, we had we just kind of we didn't at that point have the resources to sort out some of those things. So we worked out that, you know, in some households there might be a computer, a laptop, and say a tablet, and obviously mobile phones. In many other places there was only a mobile phone that one person could get on Zoom. So it was a mixed economy. So we just lived with that and dealt with that and went, okay, so, you know, and because I suppose in a way, all the work that we did in that first period, we were not breaking new ground with people we didn't know. We had a long relationship with people and whatever. So in a way I suppose we just felt confident in that relationship to kind of be able to say it sometimes, we don't know, but we'll go and find this out and we'll sort it out by next week. You know, we don't know. So you've got a problem, let's go away and we'll come back and we'll find out what you can do with your mobile phone. But can you make sure that you can borrow that mobile phone from your brother or your sister on a Tuesday morning from 11 to 12:30, so you can be on Zoom with that, you know. So there was that, and there was a lot of toing, of not massive, but there was some toing throwing with people. You know, in that case, we talked to parents, or we talked with people whoever there was some, you know, within the disability framework, there were some amazing parents and support people in families. I mean, all the support workers within the statutory environment disappeared because they were all furloughed or they were all locked down. They couldn't. So if you had a care worker, that care worker wasn't with you because you were at home. So one of the illuminating things was, of course, that a lot of people in those home environments for the first time realized what those people were doing when they would come to us at Rua Red, or which was the art center, or whatever else we did, things called rehearsals and workshops, which got them out of their place. And that was young people as well, you know, and particularly young people who never tell their parents what they're doing anyway, you know, we know that. So, and they suddenly went, oh my gosh, that's what you're doing. So that was a very interesting kind of push in you know, really positive pushback, or people kind of went, oh. And we had lots of testimonies from people to say, you know, my daughter waits for the Friday morning for this because she knows, because the rest of the week she's not doing anything. But we had other people where there was one adult man in his probably late 20s, who couldn't understand that he had to come and do his art thing on a Friday. And he used to get himself dressed and his bag packed on a Tuesday morning to go to his art. And every Tuesday morning he sat, and his parent or his sister had to say to him, no, it's Friday.
Yeah.
So
and it's online, and it's not,
and it's online, and all of those things. And then I
think there is a whole thing, and this is it's the hinterland of all of this work, which is not the activity itself, but all of the stuff that's around.
Well, it's absolutely, it's the social context. We have one of our artists is partially sighted who travels across the city from one side of the city to the other on public transport. And he's been doing that for nearly 10 years because we were the only place that he could come. Now, he has a whole social environment, in a way, in terms of real time, in the arts building that we're in. When they finish in the studio, they go downstairs, everybody knows them in the cafe, they get involved in other projects and other things. They have their own discrete kind of thing, and then they, and that's the same with a lot of our programs, of those core programs. Those people then get involved in other projects, whatever, alongside other people. So they're part of a kind of a wider social cultural community, which was removed from them, and it was removed from all of us. But for them, for some of those people, it was more critical, because actually it was it was one of the points of the week in their life when what was it? There was a kind of a verification that they were more than, you might say, the impediment that they have to deal with in terms of society a lot.
And what about the young people? I mean, I suppose the young, I said all young, a lot of them are young people as well, but what in general, your young people, they're quite used to being digital, and quite often we found ourselves, learning, like certainly when I was first teaching online, my students were quicker than me at showing me tricks about things we could do. But so in a sense, they are already in digital communities, because that's
but they're not. But they're not in digital. And this was about for both for adolescents and young adults, but also down to children. They were not used to, their digital communities that they had prior to the lockdown and the pandemic were social digital communities where they were at liberty to come and go, in as much that they logged on, they logged off, to chat with their friends, they could spend hours with them whenever. Whereas we were, we worked with a group, 40, one of the projects we did were 40 people from 8 years old up to young adults and whatever, and we made a piece and we made a film, and it was put out in June and whatever, and we all worked slightly independently in groups of it. I remember towards the end of it, I brought everybody together on a Zoom, which was like bonkers. But I wanted to say, look, can you all look at each other? We've all done this over the last 6 weeks, 2 months. This is who we are. And in 1 week's time, we're going to put out the result of what we've done online. But some of the time when we were working with the young designers and makers and whatever, and they were struggling with making things at home and then photographing them and sending to our artist who was working with green screen and digital stuff to put them in a landscape that they designed but they couldn't make, etc., etc. So there was some challenges about focus and attention and how long people could maintain their focus on online.
But arguably you get that in a workshop situation too.
Absolutely. But there's also that, I think there's also the thing about when you're in real time is that if you're in a workshop and towards the end of something, what I call rehearsal production time, you're making something and you're in a room with everybody and you're making something and you say, we have 2 more workshops to have made this and completed it. So you speed everything up, and the pressure, both from the person who's leading, but the pressure of the group to make things happen. And the challenge is when you're at home with your mum, dad, and all your brothers and sisters, and you have to say, no, I've got to do this. I've got to go to my room now, and I've got to finish making this false leg for the giant that we found on the beach. And they're going, what? And it requires a different kind of discipline to do that. And some people from the very time they're walking and they're interested, I've got that in spades, and they can do that. They can separate themselves, and other people have to learn that. And that's, you know, always, and that's for everybody. It's always the challenge of how do you meet the deadline when you don't have that collective moment where you're all in the room going, oh my God, it's next week.
I've got somebody knocking at the door. 1 minute, back in a sec. Take a commercial break.
I think the other end of that, can I just say, is when we got to the summer where there was a moment when people could come out again before we went into what was the second lockdown here, which was in late September, because I know exactly when it was. I was trying to finish a film on the day the government were locking us down, and we were in a nightmare situation. But we were working, one of our projects, which are these projects that always run over things, we're making a piece called CCSE, read by an artist called Jenny MacDonald, which is taking the mythology. There's a number of founding myths for Ireland. There's one which is there were 3 ships of 150 women who set sail from the Middle East because they couldn't get on Noah's Ark, and a woman said, you know, we're not bothering with this. Let's get our ships together and go west, sail through the Pillars of Hercules, etc., etc. Anyway, 50 of them, one of the ships survives and arrives in Ireland. So 50 women and 3 men arrive, and they, you know, set about whatever you set about doing. The men run away very, very quickly, and there are these women. So, and there are various conversations about what they did. But the project was to take that as a contemporary and do a contemporary rendition, and actually work with 50 women of different cultural and social backgrounds to say, what would it be like if, what's the stories of 50 women arriving somewhere on a boat with their baggage, both real and cultural and social baggage and histories and whatever. And we've had a core group of women that we've been working with from community, from different cultural and social backgrounds over the last year on something else. So they're a core of this thing that's been building despite the challenges. A number of them were very reluctant to come out into real time after the lockdown had eased during the summer. So there was a kind of anxiety amongst some people of meeting again in a studio to do what they do. So partly one had to deal with that. So there's an anxiety about the social anxiety about doing that. And then it was the business about everybody got used to some of the security and some of the ease of being online and doing stuff online, as opposed to getting and walking 20 minutes to a space to do your workshop and rehearsal, etc., etc., etc. So there were some interesting things about how, in many ways, comfortable people had got in being online because they didn't have to leave the 4 walls of their house if they didn't want to, and whatever. So, you know, in many ways, we anticipate, certainly with some of our groups, that a transition back to real-time working, whenever that will take place and how that does, won't be just as straightforward. One day we open up and everybody will just come back.
I'm going to ask you about that as well in a minute. But just tell us a bit about, especially going to the second lockdown and it being winter. And obviously we're all in, well, you're in the West, we're in the North. We know what these winters are like.
Dark. It's dark.
They're dark. There's not the sort of outdoor thing. People were not out and about in the same way. Obviously, we had a weird kind of Christmas. What did you do around all of that?
Well, we were working on, well, some of the work went online and continued to go online. But we were also we're part of a consortium for the last 10 years, made a collective piece called Unwrapped at Christmas, which is not, it celebrates the kind of the darkness and the light and whatever. It's not connected with Christmas or whatever. It's wholly secular, non-denominational, etc. And we were working with a London-based guest artist director, Deb Mullins from Emergency Exit Arts, and we were creating a piece. And our piece, when we got the first lockdown and we knew we couldn't congregate for 9 years, we got 300 or 400, maybe 500, 600 people at one time into a square at the back of the buildings where we are to do a big lantern processional event with music, choirs, etc., etc. So we knew we couldn't do that. So we then started a process probably went through most of last year, but it came to a critical point in that second lockdown to go, what the hell could we do? And we'd arrived at that a point where we were going to create a very large lantern figure piece to go out on the back of a flatbed truck and go to a variety of communities within localities, and people come out in their gardens and everything. And then it became absolutely obvious we weren't going to be able to do that. So we continued to work with spoken word and with music and with choir and whatever online with people. We knew some of those things that were already put in place and they were people we'd worked with. But in terms of the design and the physical moment, we had to go into another kind of place. So we'd set up a whole series of participatory stuff about window art, which lots of people have been doing elsewhere, which we did, and we got on that. But then we had a very large piece which was going from what had been a 3-dimensional figure into potentially 2-dimensional thing, but where? And out of the woodwork, and one of the communities we've done a lot of work with, where we have a youth choir and a community choir that we work with a lot, the local school, a brand new school, had a huge set of windows in a gym with no equipment because their equipment was stuck on the high seas from China because of the pandemic. The principal was an amazing woman, said, you can come and do it here. And she said, you can come into the school. We'll work out how you get in and get out. We'll work out, it's big enough space. We'll work out what we can do. And so and then the local community center down the road that was all locked up said, okay, we're going to give you the keys. You have to make sure that only that number of people in this space go in and whatever is, and that's what you do. So that's what we were able to do. So I suppose what I'm saying is that it was very difficult. It was the cold and the darkness and whatever was difficult. It was difficult when we had to keep changing until really quite late on, when we had to make the thing and then get it installed, in the time and get it up and whatever, and everything else went out online. When we'd started off, certainly still in the summer, thinking we could do something in live time. So it wasn't easy. I think we all had well, no, I won't speak for other people. I had a misgiving, quite honestly, about the idea that we were going to really relax everything for Christmas. I could see what was going to come down the line, and sadly it did. And I think a lot of other people around me said the same thing. Why do we need to? Well, there were lots of economic, political reasons about that, which was out of people's things. So I think that I would say that there was a great sense of achievement at the end of last year, before what was the third lockdown, where we felt, my gosh, we've got through this. We kind of sort of know what we're doing now. We were lucky because we were able to pick up some, there was extra money came into the Arts Council and all local authorities around capacity building, help completion funds, a variety of things to get us through, to help us do that, which enabled us to think about how we get equipment to people who are stuck at home, etc., etc. So there was a very positive kind of feeling at the end of the year. We've kind of made it and we've survived and whatever. And it wasn't.
Because I think at one point, I remember talking to you, might have been April, and it was a real kind of head scratching. How on earth are we going to do anything? Because we are a face-to-face organization. Yes. And and we're going to have to all go digital, and that's going to mean
Yeah.
everything's going to be whizzy and techno or whatever. And actually, it kind of wasn't. And in a way, you didn't do that.
No, it wasn't. And where we want to be whizzy and techno, we're discovering ways to be so that kind of in a way supports the kind of ethos that we want to be doing with people, and people want to be doing with us, and whatever. So we're working out, one of my, a friend of mine, Andrew Sid says that, one of the things, and I really seriously think about this, we've been talking about this business about how you can take people by the fingertips and lead them into an online digital experience as opposed to it being flat two-dimensional. And that's not, of course, without its challenges, but it's interesting. And I think it's interesting about the way in which slowly but surely people are learning some skills to manipulate this environment we're operating in, and we've got some good filmmakers and some people around us about that who are thinking about those things in relation to the kind of work that we do. We ain't out of the woods yet. But
what, in terms of how the organization is changing, what's going to, I mean, you're not just going to flip back to everything being like it was before, assuming we do open up, which is not a kind of guarantee. And if we open up too fast, we'll be locked down again in the autumn anyway. So there is all of that. We could well be back in a lockdown in 4 months, depending on vaccines and all the rest of it. But what would you say? I mean, how has it changed the organization? Has it changed perceptions of the organization and the organization's role in the community as well?
Well, I have to say that's kind of hard to say, really. I think that a lot of people around us who know us and who kind of, and in a way are supporters or sometimes are critics, have kind of picked up that we didn't go away, and in fact we kept going and we kept waving. We're here. It wasn't, but we're doing work, and this is what we're doing and putting it out there. I think that's the first thing. I think secondly, I think it's been an amazing, in a funny way, an amazing experience, because kind of those of us who work in that, real time thing, and are always busy because of lack of resources getting on with that, I've never had the time to think about the emerging digital skills, aesthetics, and whatever that were being going on around us, which we often have an advantage in our social life, but have not really had the time to integrate into our work life and whatever, have gone, oh, there's opportunities here. There's opportunities here. We can talk to all sorts of people in all sorts of places now that we didn't think that we could do, that you thought you had to have all real time. Well, that's not true. You have to have some real time meetings, and the ones that work really well online are relationships you've had with people prior to
I think
going online. So I'm very curious, seriously, about beginning. It's very interesting because years ago I worked in a context of international work. This was before we had email, when we used to have faxes and letters. And I always remember we got a fax machine, and the first fax that we ever got from China, when previously you had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to ring somebody in wherever to have that, which was always an exciting moment and a kind of a story to tell everybody. I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning to speak to somebody, or in Australia, whatever it is, and whatever. But, I remember the fax suddenly became a liberating kind of tool and whatever. So there is something very exciting about the fact is that we can be located very specifically in our local geography, but we can talk to you in Scotland, or you could be involved with something with there, and we can do it somebody in Cape Town, and we could talk to, wonderful director Neelam Mansingh up in Chandigarh, who's doing the most amazing work with the backdrop of what's going on in India at the moment. The the farmers of the Punjab are up in arms against what's going on, or whatever. So there's some interesting things going on. So it's about how you harness that means of communication.
I agree. I mean, I think that's true. I think there's been this, it's certainly in a sense having to sit still in one place for a long time, even if you're busy with stuff like whatever the programs are. It means some results. It meant I've kind of renewed conversations with people that I hadn't talked to for quite a long time, because you can just do that in an instantaneous way. And it's been really great to be able to just bring people in. And historically, you think, oh, well, we'd have to find the money for the airfare, and have they got time, and can they find time in their day? And actually what we found is we could just drop people in and out of sessions. And we ran a session in India about a month ago where we had 5 different countries on the call, and all in different time zones, and we all had a good conversation, and then we all went our separate ways, and it was really good. But that's partly based on existing relationships, as you said.
I've not explored yet beginning a working relationship, an artistic making relationship with a group of people online, artists and participants that I've never met previously. I'm at the moment investigating something with the local community, which is very hard to reach even in real time, and I've got some people online, you know, in a very tenuous communication. And actually interesting, I've built up a very, I think, positive relationship with one person just by our WhatsApp texts, bit of conversation, whatever it is, and whatever, you know, and I'm going, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. I do feel, though, I have to go and stand on the other side of the road from her and wave to her so she can see me in real time and I can see her in real time. I really, and that may be just, you know, maybe.
I mean, I think it's going to be quite shocking to see people in the flesh when we come out of our digital.
Well, yesterday
we start to do really inappropriate things, I'll be like.
Well, yesterday I went into my office for the first time since the 6th of January, and I saw one of my colleagues that I do a lot of work with, and we've had a lot of conversations on time, and another artist colleague who is a great friend, but you know, I haven't seen, is on the other side of the city and whatever it is. And actually, and I remember I said, stand still, to the ones on the other side of the city. I said, can I just walk around you so I can see you in 3 times? We were laughing about that, whatever. But there was an amazing moment when at the end of, you know, they were busy doing something else that they had to finish, and they could only do it in real time. Actually, it would have taken 5 Zoom sessions what they were doing, because it was quite complex about making final decisions about a, you know, a 3-dimensional limited edition of something, which you have to be in the real moment to look at that kind of stuff, really, at one point in time, even if you can do most of it online, which we often do with printers and designers, etc. But I remember when I was about to leave, and I looked at my colleague and I said, the most difficult thing is that we can't, you know, not that we're huggy all the time, but we can't give each other a kind of embrace, which was to say, it's wonderful to see you again. And we go, you know, what's the new embrace that doesn't have to be an embrace when you are with somebody in real time, you know, in a way. So there's a lot of initially probably relearning or recalibrating those kind of things. But I still think, to go back to what I'm saying, is that if you begin a relationship with people in real time, in online time, then I think there comes a moment when there's a need in return. I'll give you a very lovely story. Maybe it's a good way to end. Many years ago, when I was working in London at Lyft, a woman called Beverly Randall, who describes herself as a Black English woman, was one of our curators, okay, producers. And she was dealing, this was around the time of the handover of Hong Kong to China, okay, at that point in time. And we were presenting a piece of work which was coming from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Shanghai, and Beijing. Okay, so, and there was a guy in Hong Kong who was the curator of that work and whatever. And you can imagine it was a very challenging environment. Okay, so lots of conversations and faxes and letters and emails and telephone conversations had gone on. And then he flew to England and he walked into our office and he said, "Can I see Beverly Randall?" And we said, "She's over there." And the man nearly had a heart attack. She turned around to him and she laughed and she said, "You didn't know I was black, did I?" And he did not know what to do. And it was a wonderful, joyous moment. It wasn't a difficult moment, but it was a wonderful, joyous moment of real-time engagement when the unexpected happened, because you'd set up a whole load of other things. So there was a very positive thing about that. But at the same time, you know, it could have been fraught with all sorts of issues. So, but, you know, we've got Zoom now, we can see each other. So there are some things we can kind of work out and kind of accommodate and manage within our social and cultural experiences before we meet people in real time. But there's going to still be that moment of the shock of seeing somebody in three-dimensionality.
That's a good place to stop. I won't ask you about the box office. We'll come back to that if anyone's got questions and answers. But thanks ever so much, Tony.